On my birthday, my parents gathered 200 relatives to disown me. Mom tore my photos off the wall. Dad demanded $400,000 for raising me. My sister grabbed my keys, claiming my car was already hers. I walked out silent. Now they call nonstop. I walked into my parents' house expecting balloons. I found 200 folding chairs lined up like a courtroom, and my mother standing at the family photo wall with her hand already reaching for my baby picture. I'm Holly Dixon. I'm 32 years old. I'm an ICU nurse at Presbyterian Memorial, and that night, my own birthday, I watched my mother rip my childhood off the wall in front of 200 people, one photograph at a time. Let me back up because none of this makes sense without the years underneath it. In my family, growing up, there were always two kinds of daughters. There was Megan, 3 years older, effortless, the one my parents introduced at parties before they introduced anyone else. And there was me. Megan got a BMW 3 Series for her 16th birthday, white with a red bow my father actually rented for the driveway photo. I saved for 3 years, working weekends at a pharmacy counter, and bought a used Honda Civic with 89,000 miles on it that I was prouder of than anything I've owned since. When I graduated from nursing school, top of my class, a fact I still have the certificate for, framed in a closet because it never made it onto that photo wall, my mother's response was a sigh. If only you'd studied business, she said. Like Megan. Megan's business degree led to a series of jobs that never lasted more than a year. Mine led to a career where I hold dying strangers' hands for a living and have been told by more than one family that I made someone's worst night survivable. My mother has never once used the word proud in a sentence that included my name. The only person in that family who ever loved me the way I understood love to work was my grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield. She was sharp, funny, unsentimental in the best way. The kind of woman who'd tell you the truth about your haircut and then drive 40 minutes to bring you soup when you were sick. She was the one who came to my nursing school graduation with a homemade sign, the only person in the audience who did. When Grandma was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, I didn't think twice. I quit my hospital job, moved into her house, and became her full-time caregiver. Medications on a rotating schedule I still have memorized. Bad 3 a.m. nights, the specific exhausted tenderness of holding someone's hand through pain you can't fix. My parents visited once a month for about 30 minutes at a time, usually timed around a meal Grandma's part-time aide had already prepared. Megan visited twice in 3 years. I counted, though I never told anyone I was counting. Grandma died on a Tuesday in March, with my hand in hers, at 4:52 in the morning. I remember the time because I looked at the clock immediately after, the way you do when you know a moment has just permanently divided your life into before and after. At the funeral, my mother pulled me aside by the elbow near the flower arrangements and said quietly enough that only I could hear it, "Don't act like you sacrificed so much. It's not like she left you anything. She had no idea how wrong she was. Neither did I, honestly. Not yet, not fully, but I would soon enough." A week before my 32nd birthday, my phone rang. Megan's name on the screen. She never calls me. We text occasionally about logistics, but an actual phone call from my sister is rare enough that I answered it standing in a hospital hallway between 2 patient rooms. "We want to throw you a party," she said, her voice pitched into a warmth I didn't recognize from her. Then, almost as an afterthought, too casual to actually be casual, "Hey, random, have you gotten any mail from a lawyer about Grandma's estate?" I told her no, which was true at that exact moment, and got off the phone feeling a specific unease I couldn't yet name. In hindsight, that question was the first crack in the floor. 3 days later, my Aunt Ruth, my mother's younger sister, the one relative who's always treated me like a person instead of a disappointment, cornered me in the produce aisle of the grocery store near my apartment, gripping my arm like she'd been waiting for the chance. "Megan and Kyle lost $200,000 in some crypto scheme," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder like the cantaloupes might report back. "Your parents are frantic, Holly. They've been meeting, lawyers, I think, about your grandmother's house. Be careful." I stood there holding a bag of apples, feeling the specific cold drop in my stomach that comes from a puzzle piece sliding into place you didn't want it to fit. That night, I found a letter in my mailbox. Return address. A law office I didn't recognize, addressed only to me, subject line referencing my grandmother's estate. I didn't open it that night. I told myself I'd deal with it after the party. I told myself a lot of things that week that turned out to be wrong. I went to the party anyway. I want to be honest. Some small, stubborn part of me went hoping I was wrong about all of it. The driveway of my parents' house was packed. I counted later close to 200 cars stretching down both sides of the street. I remember thinking, walking up, that it was an enormous turnout for a birthday party for someone my family had never once celebrated with this kind of effort. Inside, there was no cake, no balloons, just 200 folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table at the front of the room like a tribunal, and a silence so total I could hear my own shoes on the hardwood. My father, Richard Dixon, stood at that table with a microphone in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. "For 32 years, he said, his voice amplified and strange in that quiet room, "we fed you, clothed you, paid for everything you needed. We had an accountant put together the total." He held up the papers like evidence. $400,000. You can pay it back, or you can sign away your claim to your grandmother's house. 200 faces turned to look at me. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word in my defense. Not one aunt, not one cousin, not a single person who'd eaten at my grandmother's table over the years I'd spent keeping her alive and comfortable. Then my mother, Carol, walked to the family photo wall, the one that had hung in that hallway my entire life, chronicling birthdays and graduations, heavier on Megan's milestones than mine. But mine were there too, technically. She reached up and pulled down my baby picture. 32 years, she said, raising an ungrateful child. She ripped it in half. The sound of it, thick paper tearing, amplified by the silence, is a sound I still hear sometimes, unprompted, in quiet rooms. She reached for my nursing school graduation photo next, ripped it. Then the photo of me and Grandma, taken the week before she died, both of us laughing at something just out of frame that I can no longer remember. A daughter who manipulated a dying old woman, my mother said. Rip. I stood there, hands numb, watching pieces of my own history flutter to the floor of a room full of people who'd known me my whole life and were, every single one of them, watching this happen the way you watch dinner theater. Uncomfortable maybe, but nobody getting up to leave. Then Megan reached into my open purse, sitting on a chair beside me, and pulled out my car keys, dangling them between two fingers with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dad already transferred the title to me, she said. I looked down at the torn photographs scattered across the hardwood, at my father's bill for $400,000, at my sister holding the keys to a car I'd bought myself, in cash, from tips I'd saved during nursing school. And something in me, instead of breaking, went very still and very clear. Dad, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, steady enough that the murmuring in the room actually quieted further. Have you actually read Grandma's will? He blinked, thrown by the question landing sideways instead of the surrender he'd clearly been expecting. I don't need to. The house goes to the family. You're sure about that? Silence. A different kind of silence than before. Not the tense, expectant quiet of an ambush, but the uncertain quiet of a man realizing, in front of 200 witnesses, that he might be standing on ground he hadn't actually checked. I turned to Megan. How deep in debt are you exactly? The crypto investment. Kyle's sure thing. Her face went white, fast, the way a face does when a private catastrophe gets said out loud in a room full of extended family for the very first time. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I looked out at 200 faces, all of them watching my humiliation unfold like it was the evening's entertainment, and I made a decision that had nothing to do with the will, nothing to do with the money, a purely personal one. I reached down and unclasped the thin gold bracelet on my wrist, the one Grandma had given me the year before she died, and slipped it into my pocket, out of sight. They didn't deserve to see it. They hadn't earned the right to watch me hold on to the one thing in that room that was actually, uncomplicatedly mine. I won't sign anything tonight, I said. I will not be ambushed into a legal decision in front of 200 people at what was supposed to be my birthday. My father slammed his hand flat on the table, hard enough that the microphone crackled with feedback. Sign it, Holly, or you're no longer a Dixon. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I walked toward the door. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said happy birthday, not one person out of 200 in the entire length of that walk to my car, the one, thankfully, still parked in my name that night, regardless of what paperwork Megan claimed existed. For 4 days after that, my phone did not stop. My parents called individually and together, at a rate my phone's call log later showed averaging close to 80 times a day between them. Megan sent a string of texts oscillating between apology and accusation, sometimes in the same paragraph. I didn't answer any of it. On the third day, I finally opened the letter that had been sitting on my kitchen counter since before the party. It was from an estate attorney named Marcus Vance of Vance & Aldridge, LLP, a firm I'd never heard of, requesting that I contact his office regarding matters pertaining to the estate of Eleanor Whitfield. I called that afternoon, my hands unsteady enough that I dialed the number wrong twice. What I learned in Marcus Vance's office, sitting across from him at a mahogany desk with a box of tissues positioned within careful, practiced reach, rearranged everything. Your grandmother came to see me 3 years ago, he said, shortly after her diagnosis. She was very clear about what she wanted and very specific about why. He slid a document across the desk, the last will and testament of Eleanor Whitfield, signed, notarized, witnessed by 2 staff members of his firm whose names and bar-adjacent credentials were listed in the margin. The house, the one my father had stood in front of 200 people and called the family's, had been transferred into a revocable trust naming me as sole beneficiary, effective the day of Grandma's death, not divided, not shared. Mine, entirely, signed 3 full years before that dinner ever happened. She told me, Marcus said, watching my face carefully as I read, that she'd watched you give up your career and your independence for 3 years, with no expectation of anything in return, while the rest of the family visited on a schedule she described to me, and I'm quoting her directly here, as 30 minutes a month like a dentist appointment. I laughed once wetly, somewhere between a sob and disbelief, because that was such a precisely grandma thing to say that I could hear her voice saying it. There's more, Marcus said. A clause. Your grandmother insisted on it specifically, and she made me draft 3 separate versions until the language was airtight. Section 12. He turned to the page. I read it twice to be sure I understood it correctly. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. Should any beneficiary or family member attempt to coerce, pressure, threaten, or legally challenge Holly Dixon into relinquishing, transferring, or diminishing her sole claim to the property and assets described herein, that individual shall be permanently and irrevocably excluded from any and all remaining distributions under this trust, retroactive to the date of the attempted coercion. She knew, I said quietly. She told me she'd lived in in that family long enough to know exactly how they'd react once they realized what she'd done, Marcus said. She wanted a mechanism that didn't depend on you having to fight them in court. She wanted it automatic, self-enforcing, which meant that dinner, the folding chairs, the bill for $400,000, my mother's hands ripping my baby picture off the wall, Megan dangling my car keys, hadn't just failed to take anything from me. It had triggered the exact clause designed to punish them for trying. Marcus recommended I bring in a forensic accountant before responding to my family at all, given the scale of what was actually at stake and the fact that my father had, at minimum, fraudulently represented ownership of a vehicle he did not legally control when he transferred the title to Megan. I met with Priya Chandrasekaran, CPA, CFE, a forensic accountant Marcus had worked with on prior estate disputes, who spent 2 full days reconstructing the actual financial picture behind my father's dramatic $400,000 bill. This number, Priya told me, tapping the printed itemization my father had apparently prepared with an actual accountant's letterhead stapled to the front, lending it a false air of legitimacy, includes things like half your childhood orthodontia, which every financial and legal precedent treats as a parental obligation, not a loan. It includes summer camp fees from when you were 9. It includes, and I want to make sure you see this specifically, an estimated opportunity cost line item for money your parents theoretically could have invested instead of raising you. That's not a real accounting category, I said. No, Priya agreed. It's not. This document wouldn't survive contact with a judge for 4 minutes. It's designed to intimidate, not to hold up. Separately, at Marcus's suggestion, I filed a police report regarding the car title, not out of vindictiveness, but because a title cannot legally be transferred without the actual owner's signature, and my father's claim that he'd already transferred it to Megan meant either he'd forged my signature, which was a felony, or he was lying outright to pressure me in front of 200 witnesses, which was merely despicable. Detective Lauren Ferris, 11 years with the County Financial Crimes Division, confirmed within a week that no legitimate title transfer had ever been filed with the DMV. My father's claim at the dinner had been a bluff, delivered with enough confidence that it had nearly worked. I sat with that fact for a long time. He'd been willing to lie to 200 people, in a room with my own name in it, on the small chance it would break me faster than the truth would. I want to be honest that the 4 days of silence weren't peaceful for me, even once I understood the will was airtight. Understanding you've legally won something and feeling okay are 2 very different states, and I did not feel okay. On the 4th night, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, buzzing my intercom for 11 straight minutes until I finally answered it, mostly to make it stop. "Holly, please," she said, her voice cracking in a way I'd genuinely never heard from her before, not once in 32 years. "Your father's business is in trouble. We needed that house as collateral. We didn't know what else to do. You ripped my baby picture off the wall, Mom." "I panicked," she said. "We all did. Megan told us about the money she lost, and your father he thought if we all came at you together, you'd understand. You'd help, because that's who you are, Holly. You've always been the one who helps." There it was, laid bare in a single unguarded sentence, the entire architecture of my role in that family, finally spoken instead of just lived. I was the daughter who helps, quietly, without being thanked, without a photo on the wall to show for it, until the exact moment they needed something big enough that being helpful wasn't going to be enough on its own. And then I became, instead, a debt to be collected. "I'm not going to fight you for money you don't actually have a claim to," I told her through the intercom, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I'm also not giving you anything. Not tonight. Not because of a bill you made up, and not because you're frightened. I needed you for 3 years, and you visited 30 minutes a month. That's the real number, Mom. Everything else on that page is fiction." She didn't have anything to say to that. I heard her leave a few minutes later. I sat on my kitchen floor afterward for a long time, the way I had once sat on the floor of Grandma's hospital room, except this time nobody was holding my hand, and for the first time in 3 years, that felt less like abandonment and more like room to finally breathe. I never had to invoke Section 12 through a courtroom. Marcus Vance sent a single formal letter to my father, my mother, and Megan, laying out the exact terms of the trust, the exact language of the coercion clause, and the plain fact, confirmed by Priya's forensic review and Detective Ferris's DMV findings, that the debt and the title transfer presented at that dinner had no legal standing whatsoever. The letter also noted, in language Marcus described to me as deliberately unambiguous, that any further attempt at pressure, public or private, would trigger permanent exclusion from the small secondary bequests Grandma had, in fact, left for my parents and Megan. Modest amounts, nothing close to a house, but enough that losing them outright, on top of everything else, apparently registered. My father never contacted me again directly. My mother sent one final email, 4 months later, that read only, "I hope you're doing well." I haven't answered it, though I've read it more times than I probably should admit. Megan's financial situation, from what Aunt Ruth still occasionally tells me over coffee, did not improve. Kyle's sure thing collapsed entirely within the year, and the two of them separated not long after. Though I've made a point of not asking for details I don't especially want, I kept the house. I moved in 8 months ago, into the same rooms where I once measured out Grandma's medications on a kitchen timer, and it feels less like inheriting a building and more like being handed back 3 years of my life that everyone else had tried to convince me were wasted. I still work nights at Presbyterian Memorial. I hung a new photo wall in Grandma's, my hallway, this past spring. My nursing school graduation photo taped back together along its crease because I couldn't bring myself to reprint it. The tear felt, oddly, like part of the truth of it now. The photo of me and Grandma from the week before she died, also mended, in a frame I bought myself. My baby picture, the one my mother tore first, restored as best I could manage with careful tape and an old frame from Grandma's attic. I wear her bracelet every day now. Nobody's ever asking to see it, and nobody ever will again, uninvited. Aunt Ruth came for dinner 2 weeks ago, the only member of that family I still speak to, and the only one who ever once, quietly, took my side. We didn't talk about the will. We talked about Grandma, the real her, the sharp-tongued, soup-delivering, unsentimental except when it counted woman who apparently spent her last lucid months making absolutely sure that the one person who showed up for her would never again have to explain herself to a room that had already decided not to listen. She never told me about the will while she was alive. I used to wonder why. I don't wonder anymore. She wasn't protecting a house. She was protecting me from ever wondering even for a second whether I'd shown up for her out of anything other than love. Turns out she'd already made sure the house would take care of itself.